Hello everyone, welcome to the Cyber Weekly. I am the gracious Okelo, your podcast host, and I am with Josephine Olo, my co-host. In this podcast, we talk about cybersecurity and all matters related to cyber, with book review monthly on other areas besides cybersecurity. I'm glad you made it. Josephine, how have you been?
Fine, thank you, Dale. How have you been?
Live and kicking.
Okay, that's good.
So, as we discussed in before, we had talked of two major areas we will be talking about, which is vulnerability assessment and patch management, right?
Yes.
So let's start with vulnerability assessment. When it comes to vulnerability assessment, how do you think you should implement vulnerability assessment?
I think the vulnerability assessment, if I understand it correctly, is basically make an assessment of how vulnerable you are, and that level that's happens at different levels. The level of the infrastructure, at the level of your operating systems, at the level of your systems. So at all levels, how vulnerable are you? And the vulnerability is mostly related to how you have, how you constructed your network or put up your network, how you're running your systems, what OSs you're using, what your policies are, what you're implementing at different, the sys admin level. So it's at many levels. Now, there are many tools out there that allow you to do a vulnerability assessment in your network. And you can obviously try and do that internally. I think recommendations vary, but I think doing a monthly assessment is not considered too often. What may be more beneficial to big companies if they're doing vulnerability assessment is to have it done externally as well, so that because sometimes it's sometimes difficult to check yourself. If you're the one who put together things, you're the one who's built a network, you're the one who's running whatever OSs you're running, you've chosen those. Um, so it's sometimes difficult to assess yourself. So I think doing an external assessment can be much more useful than if you do it internally. Internally, you also know how your network looks, and perhaps you could have blind spots as to the different areas that you're not looking at. An external party does not know enough about your network, so they're going to just do a vulnerability assessment based on little knowledge, perhaps, and that can often help you to see where you are vulnerable.
So now when it comes to that, let's break it down to starting from the physical, then the administrative, then the technical. So now for the physical, in terms of the security implementations, what would you think should be placed there? Then when it comes to the technical controls, what do you think would be more feasible? And then which policies would you implement to avoid any vulnerability?
Of course, a policy that looks at vulnerability is going to say you need to look at everything in your network. But I think I've said previously, that having a policy does not mean that it stops you from being vulnerable. It just means that it creates awareness, and it gives you processes and procedures that you follow to make sure that you try not to, you try and mitigate attacks which exploit your vulnerabilities. So on the physical level, obviously there are things that you can do to protect yourself. I think the policies that are around visitor policies around access, physical access to secure places, policies around managing your assets, employees understanding their responsibilities in all that, that's very important. And then of course you've got network, configure your network in such a way that perhaps you have outward facing servers or whatever it is are protected, with a firewall. Internally, you have a DMZ. So these are all technical things that you can do to on a network side. And of course, I'm sure you know more about this, and I'm sure you can speak to this a bit more. But I think having looked at the network, then you've got to look at your what you're running, your operating system. A lot of us run with Windows operating systems, and Windows, Microsoft, for instance, is very clear on what operating systems are being supported, which ones are out of support. And a lot of us find ourselves running OSs on our servers, or even on our desktops and laptops, running OSs which are no longer supported, which means that any vulnerabilities that come about as a result of those cannot be patched, and therefore it leaves you very vulnerable. When you're developing software, like the company we develop, in our company we develop software, we have to make sure that we are developing software by designing security in the very early stages, not waiting at the end and saying, okay, so what are our security controls? But starting at the very beginning and saying, okay, so if we were to design this system in a secure way, what would the security look like? So you're designing and then developing along a very secure design. At different levels, I think those are things that you can do in vulnerability to mitigate vulnerability. But I think what, as you said, it starts with having a culture around security. It starts with making sure that staff are aware about what that means. It also means that being able to document what it looks like in a policy, and being able to document what it looks like in procedures, and things that you do. There's a lot you can do to mitigate vulnerabilities, and it doesn't end at a higher end policy. It ends at being very prescriptive around things like patch management, having updates, how often you update your OS, how often do you making sure that you have your antivirus and anti-malware also updated often. So there are many things you can do and you should do, and there's many things that you need to do frequently. So the policy will set the stage, but you need to be able to do that. It needs to be a living thing that you do. It's not a one-off. Yeah.
Now, when it comes to the vulnerability assessments, abroad, you find that companies like Google, companies like Amazon, companies like Tesla are having bug bounty programs. And in these bug bounty programs, they usually just outsource people from different places all over the world, even here in Uganda. Found that they are having accounts on HackerOne, which is one of the bug bounty providers. And with this, they're able to find vulnerabilities. People from anywhere, even me, I can go and start looking through people's programs, and you'd be like, oh, there's this vulnerability. I don't know, when it comes to that, do you feel like the country is also going to be starting to lean towards that? Because you find that being very effective, even if you have your internal vulnerability assessment team, you find you could also require other people to do that same thing. And to make it better is you only pay them when they've actually found a vulnerability that you have actually found that it's actually a true vulnerability, not a false. So what do you think about bug bounty to be in terms of vulnerability assessment?
Okay, first you need to explain to me what bug bounty is. It just is it a way of doing things, or is it a specific name? Perhaps especially for the audience, to explain what bug bounty is.
Well, for bug bounty, it's basically deals with active penetration testing, but in a safe environment that doesn't affect the organization systems. So let's say Google. Google has their website, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this website might have vulnerabilities. Their internal team is trying to assess the vulnerabilities. But then they also bring in these other people, basically people from everywhere in the world, try to also access their system, but through bug bounty programs, not these random things of just going and starting to hack people anyhow. With bug bounty programs, it's organized that you find that the organization, like let's say HackerOne is one of those big organizations which deal in that. So the people come in, if anyone who is good with hacking and all that. So you go there, you set up your account. There are different companies there. So you pick any of those companies. So you just basically test. If it's the website, you go through like maybe Burp Suite, one of those tools which you use for testing website security. So you go through it. If you actually find a bug inside it, you report the bug, which is the error. So if you report it, the company will get back to you if it's actually an actual issue. So then they will tell you to wait for this amount of months before actually what? Them publishing that this is actually an error. So when they fix it or when they've gone through it, you will get your amount, they pay you if it's actually a problem. So you're paid for that, then what? Then they also fix the issue on their end. So that grace period, usually after you finding the bug and then them paying you and also them figuring out that there's a bug, it's an actual bug, it's usually like around 3 months, 5 months, something like that, depending on what they usually tell you. So yeah, it's a very effective method in terms to figuring out where there are bugs inside the system. So in the context of the country we are in right now, do you find that it's going to be an effective method? And do you feel like we should embrace that? Because remember with bug bounty, if you don't get a bug, you're not paid. So I feel like the costs will also not be that high compared to anyway, it's okay to have an internal one, but outsourcing, do you find like it's a very good method?
Yeah, that sounds definitely a useful method. And I'm assuming if you've got companies like Google involved, that there's a level of trust that's been built by the in terms of people, other companies trusting that system, that it works and that it's then become vulnerable to hackers. I know hackers do wear different hats, and the ethical hacking that is involved there is something that is, I think, given the the subscription base, I imagine that these are ethical hackers. I think it's definitely useful to have something like that to help users. I think what I found with getting external support to help with the company is the cost that is involved. And immediately when you talk about that kind of setup, it does give the impression that the costs involved, are not so prohibitive, because you're looking at sharing resources. I think one of the things that I'm keen on is to see a collaborative approach to dealing with these issues, and it can definitely help companies to see how vulnerable they are without getting into an exorbitant cost in the process. Now, what I would say is it takes time to build that trust that the people who are hacking are ethical, first of all, and that they will remain ethical. It's easy to know what my vulnerability is, and for me to for you to let me know what it is, and for me to try and fix it. But having known that vulnerability as a hacker, if you do not remain ethical, what happens when, in terms of you're being able to then access me and and exploit a vulnerability perhaps that I haven't completely fixed. So obviously there's a lot of trust building there, but I think it's something that could be useful, and that's something that will I know the Googles of this world are often well ahead of us in how they think and how they do this, but I think it definitely is worth something that we should consider doing.
Yeah, it's actually a very good method, because even you find, like, depending on how high, like, the severity of the that's the amount of money you pay the person. So you find that you're not so much constrained to like a full on board thing. It's more relaxed. But again, you also have to think of whether, like what you said, whether the person will actually be ethical about it. But most of the times, especially for these big organizations like HackerOne, you find that most of the guys there, they're actually really good at what they're doing. And it's actually a full-time job for them. So you find the guy is literally that's his job. So anyways, when it comes to, let's go to patch management. When it comes to patch management, first of all, what is patch management, and how would you implement patch management?
Dale, you're the student. I think you need to help me define. It's been a long time since I did patch management.
Okay, patch management is basically a company, like, let's give an example of a company. We all use Microsoft. So Microsoft has Microsoft 365, which is basically those tools, Office, Word, PowerPoint, and all that. So someone finds a vulnerability, or them, when they're testing the system, they'll find a vulnerability inside Microsoft 365. And let's say this vulnerability allows someone to hack inside that system and then do whatever he wants with that application. So with patch management, the company, when it figures out that there is that vulnerability, they will come up with a patch or something to stop that attack, an update which is enabling them to stop that attack from happening. So that's basically the patch management. So they will roll up. That's why we find that almost every week or month or so that they'll keep on releasing a new update. So most of those updates are usually for an attack which they've figured out through, like, maybe those bug bounty programs. So someone will figure out that hack, then internally they'll try to, those few months of, checking out whether it's a potential problem or not, they will come up with a patch for it. So they will roll it out, then people update their systems. That's why it is important to update your machines. So I think you now have to deal with the next question of why do you need to patch and how do you patch the systems?
Okay, so thank you for that. So patch management you've explained very well. Thank you. And basically, what a patch is something that's going to fix a vulnerability. That's basically it. And the beauty of having OSs and all that is that the Microsoft, the owners of the OSs often do the assessment of what the vulnerabilities are, and then they create patches that will fix all those vulnerabilities. Now, within an organization, you need to be able to have a patch management policy, which looks at all the systems you're running. So whether it is software, OS, your own software, anything, it's mostly software, but it's not just sitting on the OS. It's sitting on everything, all the software that sits on devices. So you even find, on your phone, you've got updates often which come about because the patches that need to be fixed and the upgrades that need to be done. And I think it's important in having a patch management process is that it shouldn't be just about I get the patch and I fix and I run it. It is making sure that you have a process which allows you to to test the patch. It's not always going to be possible, but if you're looking at maybe software that you've developed and somebody's running a patch, you need to be able to test that. So perhaps test it on a testing environment to check that the patch is not going to be detrimental to your system. So having a process in place which which highlights the fact that this is a patch, you need to test it first, and before you even once you test it and you're comfortable with it, before you even apply it, you have a fallback position. There are many patches that have failed, even with the Windows and all that. And you've also been in a position where you've run a patch and it's messed up your settings, it's messed up things. So the comfort there is that you should be able to roll back if a patch doesn't work. But ultimately having a patch management means that your systems, your whatever you're running, your firmware, whatever it is, are all running in terms of at the best level they are currently, with vulnerabilities covered, the latest known vulnerabilities covered, so that you're comfortable that you can do that. So it's good to have that where you do a test, you deploy, and you have the ability to roll back. But you also need to be monitoring what the impact of that patch is. We've all known that you can run a patch and then a few days down the line your system start misbehaving. Yeah, I mean it's happened a lot with my phone. I once did an upgrade. I know this is not a patch manager, but they did an upgrade to Windows 11, and it was so frustrating that I couldn't find anything. That after a few days, I just said, you know what, this is not working for me, and rolled back. So monitoring the performance, making sure that the performance of your patch has not, I mean, the effect of your patch has not been in drastic, that the performance of your system is now become slower or anything like that. So you need to be able to manage that. And have a system of documenting. The patch management procedure or process should be able to tell you how to run the patch, that you should be able to document how often you should be checking for patches depending on your system. Do you wait to be prompted, or do you make sure that you check for updates within your patch? I think that's essentially what I can say for that. I think as a software developer, I think what we do is we tend to test every so often the software to check for new vulnerabilities, especially depending on the platforms that the software has been built on. So we make sure that we're monitoring updates to the OSs that we run, that we're using, the OH or the database systems that we're using, so that if there are vulnerabilities that have been highlighted, then we're able to update the solutions to cater for that. Yeah. Sorry, you're on mute.
Yes, when it comes to that, there's a question I always want to ask when it comes to managing such issues. Do you find that, especially patch management and vulnerability assessment, do you find ladies thriving in that industry? And do you find that it's easier for a lady to do that?
That's an interesting question. So are you asking what about ladies in IT or just within this process? Because this is a very small process of managing
IT,
vulnerabilities generally
basically.
in IT.
Yeah.
Yes, I think there is I don't want to say to blanket every, to say that ladies are better at this and that, but I think there is, for somebody to manage your systems, for instance, at the system admin level, where they're perhaps at a security analyst level, I think people call it different things, but the roles that require the detail, the repetition, need somebody who's detail oriented, and that's something that often ladies are good at. I'm not saying that in my career, in my past, I worked with ladies and men on all this, and to be honest, the people that I work with have been very good at what they do in this both men and women in the same roles that requires that. So I think that's something that uh, it's hard to label, but I think it's more about the kind of person that you want for the role. Somebody who's detail oriented, somebody who's going to follow through on making sure that everything is patched, somebody who's willing to document, someone who's willing to follow process, somebody who's willing to work with others to make sure that the patching is done. Remember, patch management is not just going to be on servers, it's going to be on laptops, on all devices, and not all the devices sit within the remit of the security analyst or the sysadmin. So you need to be able to work with others. So you don't really want somebody who is wary of interacting with people, somebody who's very who wants to just stay in the background. You need to be able to have somebody who can follow through on and interact with people to make sure that this is done, because this is a very important um, way to protect systems and to be a little bit proactive, so that vulnerabilities are not quickly exploited. So you need to be up there with being knowing what trends are coming up, being keen on monitoring the trends, the publications. There's a lot of information that can come to you about what is what vulnerabilities are being exploited, what the attacks are. So I think it's somebody who provides that combination. So it's a difficult question, Gail, to answer. But as I said, it needs to start with the profile of the person.
Indeed. Now, I think let me now test out my pitching finally. So this time I'm pitching about vulnerability, like the last time. So this one is vulnerability. It's a Microsoft vulnerability. As you know, most of the machines we use are for Microsoft. So the vulnerability I'm talking about affects us in a way that a hacker is able to access our network and places his own code inside our system. And this code can affect our business in a way that if we have 5,000 daily users of our network via the tellers, actually the 5,000 daily teller transactions, find that it will be affected in a way that you won't be able to access it. Work will be redundant. People will have issues when it comes to performing their tasks. As administration, it will be a very high challenge talking to people in the organization. We shall have an issue of the ATM machines not working because the machines which are connected to the network, all of them will be down. And us internally, we are working proactively to stop this attack by ensuring that we patch the system to make sure that it's not susceptible to this, but be it that most of the time our network is overloaded, we find that we shall need to schedule a particular date, maybe over the weekend or a Sunday, that we'll be able to patch the system. That being said, currently we are on top of things, and what we require from management is compliance with our needs in terms of making sure that we are in strong agreement that we could perhaps wait till the last week of the month in order for us to do this, as we keep on monitoring to find out that there are no issues on the network. Yes, that's it.
Okay. So thank you for that. I think it's quite clear what it is you're asking. Although I'd probably ask you to, at the end, you need to reiterate what it is you're asking. So you basically said that all the machines that are running with MS have a vulnerability, which if exploited will bring down our tellers. I'm assuming we're like in a bank environment, which if it's exploited will bring down our tellers and our ATMs, right?
Yes.
And you're requesting that you apply the patch over the weekend so that it doesn't disrupt business, correct?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So what you're also saying is that the vulnerability is there but has not yet been exploited.
Yes.
Okay. So we have vulnerabilities on MS and it's not been exploited. Okay. I think that it's a good pitch in the sense that you've articulated very clearly what the problem is and what the impact of the problem is. And you've also articulated what you need in terms of the approvals of what the thing is. What it hasn't done is it's okay when you highlight the vulnerability and you say it's going to be fixed down the line. My concern is what if it's exploited before that time? So I'm still concerned that there's a risk. So that gap hasn't been addressed, and I'm worried. I'd start asking and saying, okay, I appreciate the impact of this. We have not been exploited yet, but what if the exploit happens before you run the patch? This is still impacting all our machines. Potentially, the whole organization would be affected. Correct?
Yes.
Yes.
So what we're working on proactively is the specific indicators of them accessing our systems. So we have set up our firewalls to actually monitor and our systems to actually monitor to find out whether there are those indicators to stop them in case that actually happens. So we are on top of things and we are making sure that whatever happens, we are actually seeing it, and our systems are actually able to track and detect when such a thing happens. And all the team members have been alerted of this. So we are actually proactively working on making sure that nothing happens under our watch.
Okay, that's good. The other thing that it would be nice for you to say is perhaps to give details around the vulnerability. When was it discovered? and then the timeline that you're given, because now we're talking generally, but you've said that vulnerability has been discovered. Perhaps today is what? Say today is a Monday. Say the vulnerability was discovered a few days before, and this is the impact of it. But within this period, we're going to be able to fix the problem. What I noticed when we discussed last time is that when we look at governance, there's also especially IT governance. IT governance is about the whole organization, yeah, and it's not just it doesn't just sit within the CISO, it doesn't just sit within the board. So there are structures, and there are expected collaboration that you need to have with the organization before you come to the board to say this is what's going to happen, right? So the comfort the board needs is that you have, through your whatever committee it is, or through the whatever executive committee it is, that you have agreed on a way forward, and that you have got clearance with the CFO, for instance, has accepted. Perhaps the CFO is on the board. The CFO has accepted any cost that will be incurred, or you have discussed with the CFO, you have discussed with the CEO that this is something that has been that is acceptable, or you've discussed with the operations person, because this is something, if you do, for instance, a patch management, if you, for instance, apply patches, it also means that the systems will be completely down and inaccessible for the time that you're doing the patch. So it needs to be clear to the board that these are all steps that have been taken to have the approvals to do the patching, that the operating person or the COO has you've discussed in your committees and agreed that this is something that the business can afford to do, that will not have a negative impact on the operations of business. So there's some structures around the governance that also need to be. I appreciate that we're not, looking at that level of detail, but I did realize that when it comes to the board, governance is also about the structures, the levels at which decisions get made. So as a CISO, when you're approaching the board, there needs to be clear indicators that this is something that you have discussed and it's been approved at a certain level before it comes to the board. So that's just as a by the way, but it also good to give the board the comfort that the different departments that are managing, whether you've talked to the risk person, or whether you've talked to the CFO about the cost, or whether you talk to the CFO, that it's something that they have approved and they're okay with going to proceed. So in this instance, there's been no cost implication. You said you're going to do the patches, and the assumption is that there's no cost associated with running this patch other than the costs that are already part of the business. I don't know if that is a correct assumption.
Yes, it's the correct assumption.
Yeah. So it's also good to indicate that. So there's a level of comfort that there are no hidden costs that the board should be that the board should be aware of. So I think look at it also from the in summary, just look at the gap where you've said that there's the vulnerability, but there's also the fear that can come about, that you say, oh, we can be hacked. So you say, yeah, we're going to do something about it, but the time in between, how are we mitigating that risk? So we already said that. And then two, what is the cost of remediating? And then the third one is making sure that all the different governance structures you pass through them before you come to the board to say, this is what we want the board to approve. So I think it's definitely a very good pitch. It's starting to talk more about the board language. The board language looks at costs, stakeholders, impact and such things. So I think it's good that you're touching up on all of those. Did I lose you? You froze for a while.
Yeah, I froze, but now back. Hopefully you can hear me now.
Yeah, I can hear you, but I don't know if you heard me the end.
You could repeat.
Where did you lose me?
Oh, just continue. But you talked of the hidden costs need to be mentioned, and costs of remediation needs to be talked about. Yes, those are the key things you're talking about, right?
Yeah, and then the risk that not the gap, because you've said you're going to remediate, you already know the vulnerabilities there, but what is that risk in between? How are you mitigating the risk before you do the patch, right? And then what governance structures have you gone through before you've come to the board? So whether it is talking to all the different level, whatever executive committees perhaps you've gone through, whether it is and making sure that you've gained approvals for, say, from the CEO about bringing down having systems offline for a while, or the CFO to approve if there are additional budget costs. The CEO is obviously on the board, but perhaps making sure that you've done the work in terms of collaborating with them to be clear on what this means for the business. So it gives assurance to the board that this is not you're not operating as an individual or as a unit, because IT governance covers everybody. So the board needs to have that layer of comfort that all the bases are being touched before you get to them.
So basically, hierarchy matters.
Yeah, it's not so much hierarchy, but structure and process matter, because you at the end of the day you don't want to be reactionary to the board. I don't know if you understand.
Yes, I get your point.
So every little thing
Now,
shouldn't have to go to the board. Yeah.
so now when it comes to insurance, now in such a situation that you're dealing with someone and definitely this whole period of waiting for me to patch the system, should their worry be there? Because you find that, or should there communication be there between the company and the insurance company, letting them know of this, and if this is even covered under the insurance in case something goes wrong?
So you're asking whether you should insure yourself before the patching? Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm asking whether we should communicate proactively with the company which deals with the patching in order for us to, when this actually happens, that we are able to, is it insured or not under them, and are they okay with us being without? Because these insurance companies usually have their specific rules and regulations when it comes to the insurance. And now we are having a new vulnerability inside the system, and we have not yet patched it. So there's a potential for it to actually affect us. So should we have that conversation with the insurance company to ensure that we are covered on that area in case an attack actually happens?
That's an interesting question. But what I would probably advise is that, look, vulnerabilities crop up all the time.
Mm.
And you're always at a risk of that vulnerability being exploited. So the time to engage insurance is when you have failed in all the mitigation actions you've taken have failed, and you've been hacked, right?
Yeah.
So what I'm assuming is that you are going to make sure that you do the mitigations required to address this vulnerability, and that you will not necessarily need to go to insurance to say, listen, I have this vulnerability, because the insurance will say, but what have you done about it? So it is having you know that you have to mitigate against it. The insurance doesn't solve that problem for you. The insurance addresses the issue when you have failed, when your mitigations have failed to work. But they also want proof that when you knew of the vulnerability, what did you do about it? So going to the insurance is not going to help you address the problem, and they will not help you to get insured or for them to insure. It'll just be bringing you back. I think what you need to make sure is that at every time, at every stage, and this is the reason I ask for that gap between patching and the vulnerability and then patching, that gap. That presents a risk, but you have a mitigation for it. You're monitoring because you know that the vulnerability exists. So if you feel that is sufficient, if the management feel that that's sufficient in managing that risk until you actually take action against it, then it's something that you need to be able to move forward with. Otherwise, it's not. I think what an organization should try and do as much as possible is to be confident enough to be able to, one, be constantly assessing their risks, the risks that they're faced, and also being in a position to be active and proactive to mitigate against those risks. Insurance comes in at the end, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess that's it for this week. Thank you all for attending, and I'll see you in the next one next week.